You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and good morning to the I Still Love This Game podcast. I hope you had a great weekend. This state of Ohio just never ceases to amaze. It really doesn't. It's meant to be spring, if you can believe that. And on Saturday, it was below freezing and raining and windy. And yesterday, it was below freezing and snowing and windy. So, one way or another, baby, I got to get out of this state. But before I do that, there is a lot of sports to talk about. And I know I've been on a little bit of a hiatus, and I am back now. But obviously, college basketball will be talked about. There's no way I can avoid that. We can also talk about some of the developments as the NBA season is winding down, and what to make of that as we head into the playoffs. But let's begin with college basketball. And let's begin with what we are seeing in the tournament. Now, prior to the tournament starting, I said I did not expect a whole lot of upsets to take place. And for the most part, I was right by that. Obviously, in the Elite Eight and the Sweet 16, we saw pretty much all the number one seeds go down. All we have left is of all the number one seeds to remain is Virginia. And if you saw their opening round matchup against the number 16, I can't remember who it was against, but they were losing at halftime. My goodness, imagine if they had dropped that one based off what they did last year as the number one seed and being the first number one seed to lose to a number 16 seed. And the feeling of deja vu was there. But they righted the ship, they woke up, and they have to be the favorites heading into this. I mean, you've got Auburn, you've got Texas Tech, you've got Michigan State, and you've got Virginia. Who would have ever picked this? And this is why I love college basketball. I really do. I mean, like, you can, when you weigh it up, even though, Michigan State, a number 2 seed, right? Virginia, a number 1 seed. But yet there seem to be absolute surprises that they made it this far. But of course, I want to talk about Duke. And where I want to go with Duke is, of course, to talk about Zion Williamson and where he's going to go in the draft and what he's going to be projected out into the pro game. I've been getting so many questions about that. And to be honest with you, I'm getting sick of giving the same answer. I don't have any idea. Because the biggest difference between the pro game and the college game is not physical. It's mental. How do you handle that challenge, that grind? 82 games. Plus all your other commitments. How do you handle that? It's one thing to handle it on a collegiate basis. When you got, the support system of a Coach K, of Duke University, of superstar teammates. Now he's going to be heading to a situation where the team he's playing on might not even be as talented on paper. I'm not even talking relatively, but on paper, to the team he's just finished playing with. If he goes to Phoenix, if he goes to New York, that could well be the situation. How is he going to handle that? He will not be able to hide behind RJ Barrett. He will not be able to hide behind Coach K. He will be pretty much thrust out there, and because of all the media attention, he will be a target. And how he handles that will determine how good he is, because talent-wise, from a physicality standpoint, I have not seen a player on the perimeter that big and that explosive ever. Some people might say LeBron James. Maybe. It's possible. But what happens? What happens when he steps in the league and he's not going up against other 18, 19, 20-year-olds? He's going to be going up against grown men who have a lot of pride in their professions. A lot of them had to work their way into the NBA. Nothing was ever handed to a lot of these players. They're not just going to roll out the red carpet for him. They're not going to be intimidated by him. And once again, he's not going to have the support structure of what he's had in Duke. So I don't know. I truly don't know how good he's going to be. From that potential standpoint, he could be one of the most amazing players we've ever seen. I'm going to love watching how he handles that pressure. because people are going to be coming for him. And especially if he's wearing a Knicks uniform or he goes to play on a big market, it's going to be something special. But that being said, I am not sold on him being, quite honestly, a top 50 player in the league as soon as he enters into it. His game still has question marks. He can get away with a lot of those things on the college level because he's going up against boys. But going up against men, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to get away with that. What happens when Draymond Green starts talking to him, or LeBron James starts talking to him, or Kevin Durant starts talking to him? What happens when, Russell Westbrook or Paul George or James Harden start to really go at him? How is he going to respond to that? Does he have the game yet to truly respond to it as well? We know what his athleticism is. We've seen he does have the ability, but he's a bit of a streak shooter to make an open shot. He's not going to get those clean looks in the NBA. People will not just simply give that to him. It was a sign of respect that he was getting those looks in the college game because teams just didn't really have an answer for him apart from conceding that. But in the pro game, that's not going to be a consistent option for him. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see what his game develops into. Beyond that, what I have thought about consistently is just how exciting the college game is. Excuse me. How exciting the college game is. And we have seen some great college games this tournament, even without the usual sprinkling of upsets throughout the first couple of rounds. We have actually seen great finishes of games. There's no other way to describe it, whether they're overtimes. But the one that stood out to me the most was the Virginia-Purdue game. And I have been on the record for so long saying I hate the intentional foul. If you're up by 3, just play it straight up. Just play it straight up. And if you guys didn't catch the game, Purdue was up by 3. They fouled late with less than 5 seconds to go. The Virginia player made the first, missed the second. There was about 5 seconds left. The ball was tapped out. It was a great pass. I don't know who scrambled to get that loose ball for Virginia. He was able to get the ball up court and a buzzer-beating shot to tie the game and send it to overtime. I hate that. I hate that you would look. Have a little bit of confidence in your ability to play defense, and that's all I've got to say about that. Because if you don't have you've got the cards stacked in your deck already. It has to be a 3. You can press up. You don't have to worry about giving up the 2. But yet they, going for the intentional foul, and the commentators loved the intentional foul. I hate the intentional foul. I don't know why they like it. I don't know why they think it's such a great strategic move. To me, it's a form of cowardice. Like, I don't trust my defense enough, so we're going to have to foul you. We're going to have to play that foul game. And I don't know what the law of averages are. I'm not going to pretend to know those. But I will say this, it's a bad look in terms of confidence. It does not pass the eye test. And when you get burnt by it, as Purdue was, it's sad because it was such a hell of a performance by their point guard. And I think he's got a great professional career in him. I can't think of what his name is now, but he went for 42 points. He hit so many threes. He kept that team in his he kept Purdue in the game as Virginia looked to break away so many times. And instantly I was trying to think, who does he remind me of? And I'll throw a name at you that I don't think a lot of people have said, but Damon Stoudemire with a more consistent outside jumper. I think he could be that kind of player in the pro game, but even more effective because Damon Stoudemire is going in up against hand checking in a much more physically imposing era, and he's got a better jump shot coming into the game, into the league. So I like what I saw from that young guy, but it's just so disappointing if you're going to lose in that way. At least make them make that shot. Don't punk out and try to win by backing in by fouling, by intentionally fouling when they're not shooting a 3, because that, offensive rebounding defensive rebounding is not a surefire thing, especially in the college game. So the fact that they gave that up, and that they weren't on their P's and Q's, and they gave up a pretty much uncontested 10-footer to send it to overtime, just shows you how fickle that strategy truly is. I mean, what do they expect? Did they expect the Virginia player to go ahead and shoot and make both? Well, guess what? Stat padding doesn't apply to everybody, and some people will do what's best for their team, and that individual clearly did by intentionally missing that second. So that's one half of the Final Four. Obviously, Michigan State, I haven't even talked about them, but what a gutsy performance by them. They didn't back down 1 inch to Duke. And what I want to say as well is the tournament, once again, I know you can't have a 68 team tournament for college football. I'm not advocating for that. But a playoff structure that's expanded to 8, hell, I'll even take 6 teams and, give a reward for the top 2 teams for college football. So if the top 2 teams, they get a bye, and the other 4 are playing for the 2 spots, I'm all for that. And the reason I'm all for that is competition. You need to have it played out. All these conversations as to who deserves to be in and who doesn't deserve it. Yeah, it's great for TV. I get that. But I couldn't care less about TV. As a fan, I want to watch the games. I don't care what ESPN wants to do in terms of talking about the sports and talking, because the thing to me that upsets me, right? And I'm going a little bit off topic here for a basketball podcast, but whatever, it's my show. The reason it upsets me is there is the point of emphasis for college football is the regular season, and they say that they don't want to mess with the integrity of college football season. They want every game to count, right? So ironically, of course, Ohio State, they were undefeated. They lost to Purdue, right? It was a bad loss. Don't get me wrong. They got blown out. They got killed to it. But they only lost once all regular season. And they went into Michigan. Michigan was ranked number 4. They went into... they didn't go into Michigan. Excuse me. Michigan went to play in Ohio State. And Michigan was the favorite. And they lost. But yet we didn't see a dramatic jump by Ohio State. And it's kind of disappointing if you're looking at it from that standpoint, because then you see teams like Georgia, who ended up finishing higher in the rankings than Ohio State, and they have multiple losses throughout the regular season. So it's so inconsistent that it's clearly flawed. So when you have a system that's that flawed, you need to start to make steps to ensure the competitive balance is on point. And we don't see that in college football. In college basketball, it's not an issue because there's so many teams in there, and they roll the balls out and they let the teams decide their own fate. And I think it's very wrong in college football that you have those you still have a system where it's out of your control, it's out of your hands. And it's frustrating as a fan. It really is. But getting back to college basketball right now, so we've got Texas Tech, we've got Auburn, we've got Virginia, and we've got Michigan State. So it's a group that I'm pretty sure nobody predicted to be in the Final Four. I know I'm way off with my predictions with it, because I thought North Carolina and Duke, like a lot of people actually felt, were going to meet in the championship game. But I have to recalibrate, and I have to pick a team, and I right now, I like Auburn. They have gone through the minefields, and I think they're battle-tested, and I like their ability to adjust how they play in terms of their styles. You saw a very quick-paced game up against North Carolina, and they ran them out of the gym. And that nobody really saw that coming. So I like what I see in Auburn, and if I have to, you put a gun to my head and you say you got to make a pick, it's going to be Auburn. But this is the magical time of the year for if you're a sports fan, because you can just sit back, put your feet up, and just enjoy these games, because they're entertaining, they're enthralling, and there's no right or wrong prediction with this, because you can justify it any which way. But once again, the beauty of it is we don't have to justify it to get the matchups. We've got the matchups, and they've earned these matchups. So therefore, we can just enjoy the results. So that's that. This is by far the longest I've talked about college basketball on the podcast, but I felt compelled to, because I've said multiple times, as the dynamics here in terms of the domestic markets and how college sports are so much more interesting and popular here than the professional sport. And that brings me to my guest. And my guest is Hayley Lewis, and she is a sideline reporter, a college sideline reporter. And the reason I reached out to her was, since I got to the United States, I couldn't help but feel a little bit deceived, because when I was in Australia, we knew about the Final Four, we knew about college football season, we know all about that, right? But we had no idea, I had no idea, the differences in passion and intensity, not just amongst the playing styles and the players and the coaches, but of the fans, between the college sports atmosphere and the professional sports atmosphere. And of course, I'm referring to basketball and football when I'm talking about this. And as I said plenty of times before, this is something that's really head-scratching to me, because there's no question that the level of skill is much greater in the pro ranks, but yet fans love the college players and the college games a lot more. And I'm determined to find out why, damn it. So, Hayley, welcome to the show. But before we get into the college sports and the comparison with the pros, you were telling me off the air that you actually go by a different name. It's not Hayley. It's very similar. So tell us what it is.
I said that Hayley is a drunk alter ego, because I end up having to pay for my own drinks. Because when I ever go out drinking, I get a little overzealous. And I'm like, I am an independent woman. No guy's going to pay for my damn drink. And so I end up looking at my bank account the next morning being like, oh, damn it, Hayley, why'd you do it?
Oh, geez. I just had so many flashbacks to my university days with the independent woman and all that stuff. But in all honesty, I'm so glad you came on the show, because for so long, and I've spoken to lots of people about this topic as well, for so long, when I say so long, it's been 9 months since I've been here, I've been trying to come to terms as to why the college game is so much more popular. And I've been drawn into it too. I'm much more interested, especially now with March Madness going on and the Final Four being set. And I am so much more drawn into it than the playoff picture of the NBA. And I've grown up watching the NBA. I've grown up being excited by the NBA. But now that I'm over here, that's all I'm interested in. I couldn't care less about the NBA right now. So I wanted to get your thoughts and your experience as to why the college game is so much more appealing to fans within the United States than the professional games.
Well, I think it's a little different. And, you really hit the nail on the head. One of my best friends is actually an Aussie. And when she came over here and started going to Oregon football games, she was like, what is tailgating? Or in my best accent, she was always like, what's tailgating, mate?
Oh, good.
I would always try to explain to her, this is the American culture. It is football on Friday night under the lights, then it is football the next morning on Saturday, and you watch all day long, and then it's back to football on Sunday again to watch the NFL. But the thing about college sports is that, like you were saying, it plays such a high level to the amount of people who are watching it as compared to people watching professional sports. It's not that one outweighs the others. You'll find people who will say, oh, I'm a bigger college fan. I don't care about watching professional sports because they don't have any heart. They just play for the money. They don't care about anything except for themselves. And then you will hear the fans who are like, well, I don't care about college sports because the pros are the ones who know how to do it best. Why wouldn't I watch the ones who know how to do it best already? And so you'll find people on both sides of the argument. Personally, I'm not quite sure why we've been, or how we've been able to, without paying our NCAA athletes, how we've been able to grow such a monopoly out of college sports. But you're exactly right. It is huge here in America, and it is a lot of fun to watch those athletes go out there and give it their all, because I think the most important thing here is that a lot of these athletes, even though only 3% of them will actually go on and play professional sports, a lot of them know what is on the line. And so they play with such heart in college because they know that they could earn themselves a contract with some exposure, and they could earn themselves an entire set-up lifestyle, of course, if they play their financial cards correctly. But it has so much on the line, and again, it's such a monopoly in the United States because all these college fans are fueling colleges with more money to bring in better stadiums, to bring in, amazing soundboards and all these things that kind of are at the same level of NFL teams. I mean, when I was at Oregon, you go look at their facilities, it's better than a lot of NFL facilities. That's how good it is because there's that much money going into these programs. So it's really cool to see it on the back in the States and this kind of side of how big things are here. But to answer your overall question, not quite sure why it's as big as it is here, but it has been able to continue to have such a strong standing and backbone in our society today. Like I said, it's something that fans will do Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
That's a really interesting point that you brought up, because I've heard some of what you've said before. I've heard the comparison between the pros to college. The pros don't play with any intensity, and I've also heard that the pros play at a much higher skill level because they're more refined. But the fact that you brought up that, hey, some of these college athletes, they realize that this is their only chance to make a career out of it. So they're playing with that much more passion, that much more heart, that much more intensity, makes it much more appealing. I'm really glad you brought that up. That's a very, very strong point, and that's something I haven't heard before. But I have another theory, and I want you to tell me if you disagree with this, Hayley. But when I see is the lack of ability for most fans to be able to relate to professional athletes, especially in the NBA. Not so much the NFL, although we're starting to see NFL players who are still under contract force their way out of those teams and those situations so they can get signing bonuses or whatever. But the NFL, for the large part, they still have their hierarchy in place. The owners still call the shots. The coaches still have power. In the NBA, we've seen it flipped around so the players really call the shots. And if they don't call the shots, and there's massive backlash and outrage, not towards the players, but typically towards the organizations. Just look at the Anthony Davis situation. The dude's under contract. He tried to force his way to Los Angeles, and when that didn't happen, the general manager of the Pelicans ended up getting fired for that entire situation. So to me, I think most fans, they simply cannot relate to modern professional athletes anymore. And because of that, they can relate a lot more to the college players and the college athletes, and therefore that game becomes more appealing.
Yeah, and I see that perspective. I mean, you see, like the other day, everyone was talking about how LeBron is no longer coachable because he's at the end of the bench on the Lakers bench, and he's not even listening to the coach in the circle because, his salary's already paid. It doesn't matter really. Well, it does to a degree if they make the playoffs. But, LeBron is LeBron. He's always going to be LeBron and bring in the type of money that a LeBron will bring in. And he's sitting on the end of the bench, and people are giving such criticism because it's like, you're not even in the circle. You're not even listening. But I think there's also this other perspective that comes in where, LeBron has such an elite level of basketball knowledge. Does he really need to listen to every single huddle? And I think that's where you do lose the collegiate fan because it is hard to relate to someone who is that vastly intelligent in one sport and who has such a strong knowledge that they really don't need the coaching, which a lot of other fans who are watching college ball really enjoy seeing, that whole perspective, that whole feel-good family environment and seeing how the coach raises up these kids to get to that stature and that level. But again, I do understand that's the NBA, though. The NBA can play with money in a crazy way that other leagues haven't really tested out quite yet. I mean, we just saw for the first time Antonio Brown really was one of the first people who made an NBA play or made an NBA move in a football type of salary and in a football environment.
He got for that too.
Exactly. And so that's where the whole, how do these fans watch both and love both, because they're becoming such vastly different things. But that's also, the NCAA is also kind of being subjective to those certain things because now we're calling for players to be paid and to be able to leave earlier and to not even have to go to college and just go directly on to the NBA or the G League. So it's an ever-changing world, and it's very cool to see how it all plays out here in the United States. But the one thing I'll say, I used to be friends with a wife of a player in the NBA, and I watched what that family went through for the salary, which he brought in a very nice salary. They gave up their entire life to follow around this career, and he is out there every single day busting his behind to bring, what he can home for his family and this, but he does that at such a great sacrifice. Not spending time with his children as much, not being able to be with his wife and kids, them constantly picking up and traveling from place to place, her husband being subjective to everybody's criticism who has a Twitter account. And I think, people might say, oh, well, poor you make a crap ton of money. Well, they do so for a lot of reasons because they're giving up their body and their families to bring in entertainment for us. So I see both sides. I see people, leaning away from the professional sports, and I also see people, who are just diehard fans of it.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there to respond to there, Hayley. Let's start with the LeBron thing. And you're right that, the media does make a big deal over every little thing that he does, but at the same time, he does play into the media's hands quite a lot. And look, I've got no problems with him sitting on the end of the bench, especially if he's annoyed with a result or disappointed with a result. I'm sure he didn't come to Los Angeles to miss the playoffs. I'm pretty sure he didn't come there to win a championship. If he wanted to win a championship, he probably would have explored other options like Philadelphia, for example. However, I'm pretty sure he's not happy with what's transpired, especially since his return from his groin injury. But what LeBron has run into also goes back to the overarching theme of this question, and that is, are the players bigger than in the professional leagues than the entire organization? Now, LeBron has run into an organization where that's not the case. He's not in Cleveland anymore, so he cannot get away with these tactics anymore. He cannot do that because this franchise and this fan base, there's a deep loyalty, to that franchise. And just think back to the history of the Lakers. I mean, they have always put that franchise first. Think back to Kobe in 2007. They booed him when he demanded a trade in the offseason. And they love Kobe to death now. They've always loved Kobe. But that being said, when he demanded a trade, that was his way of saying that that's not good enough for me. So the fans responded. They didn't take his side. They took the Lakers' side. And that, once again, keep in mind, Kobe had won 3 championships, not a couple, but 3 championships prior to that. What has LeBron done for the Los Angeles Lakers? He's done nothing apart from being really the centerpiece of a very disappointing season that we've just seen. So, and once again, it looks like he's I'm not sure if that's his intention, but the perception is out there that he is bigger, or he feels that he is bigger than the coach. He's bigger than the other players. He's bigger than the general manager. He's bigger than the fan base. So there's going to be some backlash, and I think that's it's a situation that you're probably going to find in a lot of professional sports coming through. The perception is out there that they think that the players think that they're bigger than the actual game themselves. But there is another point that I wanted to touch on that you mentioned a second ago, and you're talking about there's a move for players, athletes, in the NCAA to be paid, and I can't believe they're still not being officially paid. Because when you look at it, I think that the ticket sales should stay within the universities and the schools, and they can go to scholarships, they can go to funding the universities themselves. But I think in terms of endorsement, there's so many opportunities for endorsements, whether it's apparel, whether it's video games, whether it's merchandise, whatever it is. There's so many sponsorship opportunities. And yet, for some reason, they're stuck in this situation where they don't want to do this.
I know, and that's so frustrating, especially since they're giving up their bodies for this profession. And for some of them, they lose out on any money they were ever able to make because of a season-ending or career-ending injury premature to the time that they are allowed to make it into the professionals. And if they had just gotten that professional contract, their whole life story would have been different. But because they weren't able to accept endorsements, and because they weren't able to use the abilities they had at the correct time, because the difference between 17 and 18 and 19 years old, they're apparently not going to have the earnings that they could have ever potentially had. And that's really that's upsetting. And my brother's a Division I athlete. My father was as well. I have been around numerous athletes before. And these kids give up everything. Mm-hmm. They are night and day in that weight room, on the field, dedicated to their craft.
Study during this time as well.
Exactly, and yet they still go to school and are expected to make such, good academics, which I think is very important, and I'm glad that we do push for them to be well-rounded in today's society. But come on, you wouldn't let a kid, be able to be on a ketchup commercial? I mean, just something. Let them be able to use their voice.
It is very contradictory when you think about it, because let's look at some of these top-tier schools. You think about Duke, you think about Florida, you think about North Carolina, Kansas, UCLA, Oregon, all these places, USC, and their demands of their student athletes is basically for them to be held to a higher standard than professional athletes. Because you think about it, there's no leverage for a student athlete. If they are cut or if they lose their scholarship, then okay, that university loses that scholarship for that 1 year. But it's not like you have to, even in the NFL, like we know the NBA is all guaranteed money, but even in the NFL, there's typically signing bonuses that need to be paid or things of that nature that will at least make sure that the football player will walk away with something if they are cut. Whereas with the college athlete, they don't have a whole lot to fall back onto if they are indeed shown the door because of any transgressions or just not performing well. So, unfortunately, I think that it's inevitable that we're going to see a huge scandal come and all this come to light. And I don't know what's going to happen, because we've seen whenever we've seen smaller scandals, we've seen championships taken away or records taken away or trophies taken away, Heisman trophies, for example. I don't know what they're going to do if it shows what we all suspect, and we all pretty much know that it's across the board, because there's such a heavy incentive to pay these athletes under the table. And the odd thing is, if there is a scandal, I think there'll be a lot of sympathy towards the athletes in this situation and not so much towards the NCAA, because they've been rigid in this, and they're the ones that haven't allowed any flexibility towards the players being played. And the incentive is there, and I think a lot of people will actually look towards the players with sympathy.
So what do you think's going to happen? It's kind of like the drug situation.
It's like weed.
Yeah, right, exactly. And you watch, the numbers for weed will probably plummet now because now it's legal.
And by the way, kids, please don't do weed.
No, they do not.
Oh, no. I mean, please, if you're listening, you're a kid, please don't smoke weed.
We are not endorsing
that.
Hayley Lewis, the zealous Hayley Lewis may be endorsing it, but no, I'm not endorsing that on my show. But
oh man,
ladies and gentlemen, Hayley Lewis, that was a good conversation. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, of course. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
And as promised, I feel once again compelled that I have to do this, because this is an NBA podcast. We've got to talk about the NBA, and it was 5-6 games, depending on which team you are, away from the playoffs and the end of the regular season. Thank God. Thank God. It's been a long season. It's been a long, boring season. Take James Harden's brilliance out of the way, and not much has really happened. But I was looking, I was having a look at the standings, and something interesting came to my mind. So the top two seeds in the Eastern Conference, Milwaukee, 57-20. Toronto is 54-23. Golden State is currently leading the Western Conference at 52-24. It got me thinking, when was the last time the top two seeds in the NBA, the top two records, not the top two seeds, but the top two records in the NBA were both in the Eastern Conference? I can't remember it. Even with Jordan's Bulls, I can't remember it, because, 98, the Bulls didn't even have the best record in the league. They were tied with Utah, and Utah had the tiebreaker. They were at 62-20. The year prior to that, the Bulls had won 69 games. The number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference was the Miami Heat. The number 2 record in the league was Utah at 64. The year prior to that, the Bulls, they won 72 wins, and Orlando had won 60 games that year. Seattle had won 64. So I can't remember the last time that we've actually seen the top 2 seeds or the top 2 records in the NBA for the regular season coming out of the Eastern Conference. We've seen it plenty of times come out of the West, especially recently. But I can't tell you the last time they have both resided in the Eastern Conference. So what I'm going to do now, apart from that little bit of trivia, is just go down and have a look at if the playoffs were to end today. Oh, if they were to start today, not if they were going to end today. And we got the Bucks versus the Heat. That should be interesting, but I expect the Bucks to take care of business in 6 games. Miami's not going to go away without a fight, especially with Dwayne Wade. The Nets versus the Raptors. Once again, I mean, I don't want to turn this into Groundhog Day and say, well, there's question marks about the Raptors. This is a pretty different team for the Raptors, by the way. The only guy that's really recognizable that has been on those past failures for the Raptors is Kyle Lowry, and I guess to a lesser extent Ibaka. So I'm quite convinced that Raptors will also take care of business. You got Philly versus Detroit. That could be interesting. I think Detroit has a lot of talent, especially up front, that could give Embiid some issues. But I think Philly will take care of business, especially with their superior backcourt. And then you got Boston versus the Pacers. I think that might actually be the most the biggest blowout in the first round. I think the Celtics could win that in a sweep just because the Pacers are starting to free fall finally after the Oladipo injury. So that's what we're looking at so far. But in the West, we've seen Houston really emerge. They're not going to be able to catch Denver or the Warriors, but they're only 2.5 games back of the Nuggets. They're not going to catch them. But clearly they're half a game ahead of Portland. But they understand the importance of securing that third seed so they can potentially play Denver in the second round as opposed to Golden State in the second round. Portland is sitting at number 4. Utah at number 5. The Clippers, give Doc Rivers all the credit in the world for this. He's pushed them up to number 6. The Spurs are number 7. And Oklahoma has fallen down to number 8. And we could have a dream matchup between the Thunder and the Warriors in the first round. That would be something. Because the Thunder are not just going to roll over in that situation. They're not going to be intimidated in that situation. And the same can be said for the Spurs too. The Warriors rode back to the finals. And assuming they get back to the finals, there's a good chance they won't even have home court in the finals, based on what I said earlier. So we're going to see very interesting playoffs, very competitive playoffs. This is the first time in a long time that I have not been pushing for 1 through 16 and no conferences because we got some good talent and some good playoff matchups throughout. It's balanced. I'm happy with it. I'm satisfied with it. I just hope we don't get some horrific officiating, which we always do. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited for it. If I have to pick a team right now, it's Houston. I think Houston is rolling right now. They've survived the injuries. They've survived Carmelo Anthony. James Harden is playing at his absolute best, and that is saying something. So I think Houston is the team to watch out for. Obviously, you've got Golden State, but they could implode at any minute. Then they say they're focused, but then quite honestly, that focus is temporary at times. And for a team that's been through the wars as much as they have, I know boredom sets in at some point too, but man, they don't make it easy on themselves sometimes. I'm still not sold on Boogie Cousins either. Because when what I want to say about Boogie Cousins one last time before the playoffs is his strength is scoring. He can't do the other things as effectively. He's not a great player off the ball. He's not a great defender. He's a big body. I know that. He's a decent rebounder. He's a very good ball handler and passer for his size. But Golden State don't need any of that. What Golden State needs is somebody who can work away from the ball, because you've already got Steph Curry, you've already got Klay Thompson, you've already got Kevin Durant, you've got Draymond Green, who seems to think that he's a playmaker as well. So where are those shots going to come from if you're Boogie Cousins? And if that's his strength to be effective is to score, then once again, that's an issue. So that's my concern with them. Whereas you look at other teams, they seem to fit a little bit better into their roles. And if Russell Westbrook ever gets around to getting any type of consistency behind his jump shot, they're going to be a scary proposition even in the first round up against Golden State. Because, 2 or 3 weeks ago, had I had said Golden State versus Oklahoma in the conference finals, I'm sure a lot of you would not have blinked. And this is basically the same team. They've free-fallen a little bit. They've had a really rough schedule after the All-Star break. But maybe that's what they needed to prepare themselves for the playoffs. They're not going to be surprised like they were against Utah in last year's playoffs. They're already in playoff mode now. They've had to be in playoff mode to consolidate their playoff position. So that will be interesting. But that's all really I have to say about that, because I'm still just thinking about college basketball right now. I'm just enjoying that. But I'm sorry for the hiatus, and I'll be posting more frequently, obviously, with the Final Four and the National Championship game coming up. And then the NBA playoffs are coming up too. And this long season will be finally over. So thank you for listening, guys. Go follow Hayley Lewis, our guest. I believe it's at Hayley Lewis 93 on Instagram. And once again, thank you very much for hanging out, and I'll catch you on the next episode.